Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered why certain men seem to live rent-free in a woman's mind, while others are easily forgotten? Now, I'm not talking about mind games or manipulation. No, I'm talking about becoming the kind of man who leaves a mental imprint. The kind of man whose silence makes a woman pause, whose distance doesn't breed anger, but concern. Today, I'm going to break down how to make a woman worry about you not out of fear, but out of emotional investment. Because when a woman begins to worry, it means she's begun to care, and that, my friends, is where the magic begins. Being unpredictably consistent is one of the most powerful ways to stay on a woman's mind without trying too hard. At first glance, the idea may sound contradictory. How can you be both unpredictable and consistent at the same time? But the secret lies in balance. When you're consistently present, thoughtful, or attentive, a woman begins to rely on that energy. She gets used to your presence, and that reliability gives her a sense of security. But if everything becomes routine, if your words and actions start feeling scripted or too available, her emotional engagement starts to dull. She knows what's coming, and humans rarely value what feels guaranteed. So, you have to find a way to show up, to be steady, while still leaving enough space for surprise. That's where unpredictability comes in, not as chaos, not as games, but as a way to keep the emotional connection alive and awake. Let's say you're someone who texts her every morning with a good morning message. It's sweet, it's caring, and yes, in the beginning, it probably lights up her face. But after a while, it becomes a part of her routine. She expects it. She stops checking her phone with excitement because she knows it'll be there. But what happens when you don't text one morning? Suddenly, that absence is louder than the presence ever was. She notices. She wonders. She questions. Did something happen? Is he upset? Is he losing interest? That space, those few inches of uncertainty, create emotional movement within her. That's when she starts to worry. And that worry doesn't mean she's panicking or fearful. It means she cares. It means you've become important enough for your silence to echo. The same goes for your behavior and your gestures. If you always show affection in the same way, say the same compliments, or respond to her the same way every time, it becomes mechanical. But when you mix it up, when sometimes you give her deep, undivided attention, and other times you pull back just enough to focus on your own life, it forces her to be more present in the connection. She pays more attention to your moods, your energy, and your intentions. And that awareness keeps the emotional current flowing. It's the kind of dynamic that stirs curiosity. You don't want to be completely unreadable or cold, but you do want to leave enough unpredictability that she has to think about you when you're not there. This strategy also applies to how you share your thoughts and emotions. If every conversation follows the same pattern, if she always knows what you'll say, how you'll react, or when you'll show up, she starts tuning out emotionally. But if you sometimes pause instead of replying immediately, if you sometimes end conversations first, or if you're the one who steps back to process instead of being constantly available, she takes note. She realizes you're not someone she can place in a neat, predictable box. And once she can't predict you fully, she can't dismiss you easily either. That little bit of unpredictability can make her rethink her assumptions, which deepens her emotional investment. Women are not drawn to chaos, but they are drawn to depth, and depth often requires moments of pause, of silence, of subtle change. When you show her consistency in how you value her, but allow for shifts in your behavior and availability, you send a powerful message that you're stable but not stagnant, that you care but you're not needy, that you're present but not controlled. This balance creates emotional weight. She starts to associate your presence with excitement and your absence with questions, not because you're playing games, but because your energy doesn't fall into a routine pattern. You become someone who makes her feel something without always having to say something. You become someone whose next move isn't always obvious. and that alone keeps you lingering in her mind long after the moment has passed. When you master this balance, you no longer have to chase her attention. Your unpredictably consistent presence will do it for you without even trying. Having a life bigger than her is not about making a woman feel secondary or unimportant. It's about showing her that you are a man with vision, depth, and drive. It's about demonstrating that your world doesn't revolve solely around her, and that while you may deeply value her presence, your life has purpose with or without it. This is incredibly attractive because it communicates emotional independence, ambition, and a sense of grounded self-worth. When a man is too readily available, too quick to respond, too eager to be around all the time, what often happens is that he unknowingly starts shrinking his world to fit into hers. In the short term, that might feel romantic or sweet, but over time, it starts to feel like he has nothing going for himself outside the relationship. That's when she stops wondering where he is, what he's up to, or whether he's thinking about her, because she already knows. He's waiting, he's available, he's always there. On the other hand, when a man is focused, when he's building something meaningful in his life, whether it's a career, business, a passion project, or even self-development, that energy shifts. It sends a powerful message that he has a mission. And when a man is on a mission, people take note, including women. She begins to sense that she is not your only priority, and while some might assume that's a bad thing, it's actually what creates intrigue. It makes her want to be part of your world, not your whole world. When a woman starts to realize that your attention has to be earned because you're pouring yourself into your goals, your passions, or your purpose, she feels the weight of your time. She values your presence more because she understands it's not given freely to just anyone. Let's be clear. It's not about ignoring her or making her feel unimportant. It's about choosing your time wisely. If she calls and you don't always answer right away because you're genuinely busy working on something that matters to you, she begins to think about you more. She starts asking questions internally. What is he doing? Why isn't he calling back immediately like before? Is something on his mind? And those questions create emotional activity. They make her realize that your time isn't always accessible, which makes her crave it more. When a man has nothing to do, nowhere to go, and no ambition driving him, he becomes predictable. Predictability, when overdone, dulls desire. But when you have a life that's moving forward, with or without her, it stirs something in her that makes her want to be included, to support, to invest. Think about how people react to someone who's always working on something exciting. There's a natural curiosity that builds. You hear someone say, "He's been off social media lately. I wonder what he's up to." Or, "He hasn't called today. Maybe he's working on that project he mentioned." That curiosity is healthy. It builds anticipation. It creates space for attraction to grow. When she sees that you're always growing, always moving, always evolving, she starts to see you as someone who cannot be contained or tamed easily. And that's where admiration turns into emotional desire. She realizes that she can't control you, and that lack of control makes her want to stay connected, to try harder, to become part of that forward motion. Even your silence, when grounded in purpose, speaks volumes. When you're not available, not because you're playing games, but because you're focused, your absence becomes a message. It tells her you're not just sitting around waiting for her attention. It tells her that your value doesn't come from proximity, but from purpose. That your love, your time, your energy are valuable currencies, and they're not handed out loosely. She begins to see your time as something to earn, not something to expect. And in that process, she worries, not because you're losing interest, but because you've become too valuable to take for granted. You've become the kind of man whose life pulls her in, not because you beg for her attention, but because your ambition and purpose naturally make her want to stay connected. The moment she starts to sense that your life is bigger than her, she doesn't feel pushed away. She feels pulled in because now she's no longer the center of your world. She's fighting for a place in it. Emotional self-control is one of the most underrated forms of power a man can possess. And when it comes to making a woman think about you, miss you, or even worry about you in a healthy, intrigued way, this is one of the strongest tools you can use. A man who doesn't react to every situation, who doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve all the time, and who can hold space for emotion without being controlled by it, automatically separates himself from the crowd. Most people are predictable in their emotional responses. If they're upset, they lash out. If they're excited, they overshare. If they're hurt, they chase or withdraw dramatically. But when you are emotionally grounded, when you respond instead of react, you create an energy of mystery and strength that a woman cannot help but notice. She starts to sense that your emotions are not easily swayed, that your validation doesn't depend on her mood or approval, and that realization unsettles her in a way that makes her pay closer attention. There's something incredibly magnetic about a man who doesn't reveal everything he's feeling the moment he feels it. That doesn't mean you're cold or emotionally unavailable, but it does mean you have the emotional maturity to process your feelings without needing immediate resolution from her. For example, when something bothers you, instead of exploding or getting passive-aggressive, you take your time. You might become a little quieter, a little more observant, but you don't lose control. And it's that control that gets under her skin in the best possible way. She starts wondering what's going on in your mind, why you haven't reacted the way others would, why you're not fighting for her attention when she pulls back. That uncertainty, that silence, becomes more powerful than any words you could have said. It holds emotional weight. It makes her question how much access she really has to you. Women are intuitive. They pick up on energy quickly. When you stay calm and collected, even in moments of conflict or emotional tension, it throws them off in a good way. Because what they expect is an argument, a chase, an apology, or some form of emotional performance. But when you're silent, not from pride but from power, your silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. She notices the shift in energy. She senses that something's changed, and that feeling lingers. Emotional self-control is not about hiding who you are. It's about choosing when and how to reveal parts of yourself. When you can do that with intention, she stops taking your presence for granted and starts analyzing your distance. It's also important to understand that when you can manage your emotions, you automatically set the tone in any connection. Instead of being dragged into emotional chaos or drama, you hold steady. You don't beg, you don't plead, you don't over-explain. You create space, and in that space, she's forced to reflect. She's forced to sit with her own emotions, her own reactions, her own assumptions. And often, it's in that space that she begins to realize your value, because you're not just another guy reacting impulsively. You're the man who knows when to speak and when to hold your peace. That control, that emotional restraint creates respect. It creates curiosity. And most of all, it creates emotional tension. The kind that keeps you in her thoughts long after the conversation is over. When a woman can't predict how you'll respond emotionally, she remains engaged, not confused, not frustrated, but interested, because what you're showing her is that your emotions are not cheap, that your vulnerability is not available on demand, that she has to earn the right to know what's going on beneath the surface. And in that effort to understand you, to reach you, she becomes more emotionally invested. She starts wondering more, questioning more, trying more. Because emotional self-control isn't about pretending you don't feel, it's about demonstrating that you are strong enough to feel without falling apart, to care without losing your center, and to love without giving up your power. When you stop over-communicating, when you no longer feel the need to explain every little move, every feeling, every decision, something powerful begins to shift in the dynamic between you and a woman. Overcommunication often stems from a place of insecurity, the fear that if you don't keep her updated, if you don't constantly reassure her, she might lose interest or misunderstand your intentions. But the truth is, That very habit of over-explaining can actually have the opposite effect. It can dull the intrigue, kill the suspense, and remove the natural space that allows desire to breathe and curiosity to grow. A man who feels the need to constantly check in, explain himself, or justify his silence becomes predictable. He becomes someone she feels she has fully figured out, and when there's nothing left to wonder about, when your words leave no room for interpretation or imagination, she mentally checks out. What you have to understand is that silence is not always a threat, it's a tool. When used wisely, it speaks more than your words ever could. You don't always have to say, "I'm busy," or "I'll call you back later." You don't need to write long messages explaining why you couldn't reply instantly. The moment you stop justifying every move, you start shifting into a more grounded, more powerful energy. It says, "I don't need to prove anything, and if I'm quiet, it's because I'm choosing to be." That quiet confidence creates an air of mystery that pulls her in. She starts wondering why you didn't call, why you didn't text back as fast, what's changed. And that wondering, that emotional activity, is where worry, desire, and attention all come from. There's a difference between healthy communication and constant reassurance. When you've already shown her who you are, when your actions have proven that you care and that you're consistent, you don't need to keep explaining yourself. You let your silence hold weight. You trust that she knows who you are, and if she doesn't, that she'll come closer to find out. Think about it. What do people remember more? The person who constantly reminds them they care, or the one who creates just enough space that they start to miss their energy? It's in that space between words that reflection happens. It's when she starts asking herself questions instead of relying on your messages to fill the silence. When you don't explain yourself all the time, you also give your presence more meaning. Because now, when you speak, it matters. When you share, it feels intentional. It's not noise, it's signal. Women pay attention to men whose words carry weight, not because they speak a lot, but because they speak when it counts. So when you stop over-communicating, you're not being distant, you're being deliberate. You're saying, "I don't need to fill every silence with an explanation, because I trust myself enough to know that I don't owe my energy to everyone at all times." That creates a boundary, and boundaries are incredibly attractive when done with maturity and strength. It's also important to recognize that constantly updating someone gives away your power in subtle ways. It says, "I need you to know where I am so you feel safe." But if she's the one wondering, if she's the one sitting in uncertainty, then she's investing emotional energy. And when someone invests emotionally, they become attached. So your silence, when not rooted in manipulation but in grounded self-worth, becomes a mirror. It reflects her own desire back to her. She starts checking her phone more. She starts thinking about you more. She starts noticing your absence in ways that only happen when your presence once carried weight. And that's the energy that makes her worry, not out of fear, but out of attraction, out of emotional interest, out of a deepening awareness that you are not someone who can be reached at all times, that your energy is sacred, and if she wants to be part of your world, she'll have to step into it. With presence, respect, and intention, when you disappear with purpose, something shifts in her mind. It's not about ghosting, and it's not about playing immature games to trigger insecurity. It's about intentionally stepping back to let your absence speak in ways your presence cannot. You see, when you're always available, always showing up, always giving, she stops noticing the weight of what you bring. Human nature takes consistency for granted, especially when it's unearned or constant. But when you remove yourself strategically, not out of spite but out of self-respect, you allow her to feel the vacuum your absence creates, and that vacuum makes space for reflection, curiosity, and yes, worry. Purposeful disappearance is powerful because it's not about being vindictive or cold. It's about shifting the energy back to yourself. It's saying, "I am not here to entertain or chase. I am not here to be an emotional crutch or a safety net. I am here when I choose to be, and that choice is based on alignment, respect, and mutual energy." That kind of withdrawal doesn't provoke resentment, it sparks awareness. She starts wondering why you're no longer texting first, why you're not checking in like you used to, why the energy shifted. And in that wondering, her emotional focus moves toward you. She starts asking herself, did I do something wrong? Has something changed? Is he seeing someone else? Why am I missing him when I thought I had him figured out? The power of purposeful silence lies in the clarity it brings. It separates the genuine from the convenient. It makes her evaluate what you actually meant to her, rather than what she assumed. Because when someone disappears for a while, we're forced to sit with the space they once occupied. That absence becomes a mirror, showing us the value of what was there. It's in that space that she begins to realize how much of your energy she was receiving without truly earning it. And when that energy disappears, it feels like something is missing. Not because you made her dependent, but because your presence carried substance. You don't announce your exit. You don't warn her that you're pulling back. You don't send dramatic final messages. You simply allow your energy to fade quietly into the background, and that silence becomes louder than any confrontation could be. She notices the change. She might even act unbothered at first, but if your presence had any depth, if you were showing up as your authentic, grounded self, she'll feel the shift on a deeper level. The key is not to disappear to punish her, it's to recenter yourself. To refocus on your own growth, your purpose, your peace. You step back not because you want her to chase, but because you're no longer willing to overextend, and during that time away, you're not sitting by your phone, waiting for her to notice. You're evolving, you're sharpening your vision, you're pouring back into yourself, because the most attractive thing about purposeful disappearance is that it only works if you're actually doing something with the space you've created. If she sees that you've become more focused, more aligned, more confident when you return, or if she sees you thriving from a distance, it creates a new emotional context. She no longer sees you as the man who is always available. She sees you as the man who knows when to walk away, when to reemerge, and how to maintain his power without ever needing to raise his voice. That shift changes everything. Now she's the one questioning, the one leaning in, the one uncertain about where she stands. Not because you manipulated her, but because you reminded her of your value. You showed her through your absence that your time, energy, and presence are not to be accessed casually, and that awareness lingers. It sits with her when she's scrolling through her phone. It echoes when she hears a song that reminds her of you. It lives in the back of her mind when she wonders what you're doing, who you're becoming, and whether you'll return at all when you become hard to read. When you stop broadcasting every emotion, every thought, and every intention, you shift the emotional power and the dynamic in ways that can't be overstated. People naturally fear what they don't fully understand, and women are no exception. When a man becomes emotionally predictable, when every response is anticipated, when his reactions become routine, he loses that edge that keeps a woman emotionally invested. But when you carry an air of unpredictability, not in a toxic or manipulative way, but in a deeply grounded and emotionally intelligent way, you start to invite her mind to participate in your presence more actively. She starts thinking, analyzing, wondering what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what your next move might be, and that's exactly where curiosity and emotional tension begin to bloom. Being hard to read doesn't mean being cold. It doesn't mean shutting her out or being emotionally unavailable. It means showing just enough to keep her connected, but never so much that she feels she's fully figured you out. It's about maintaining a certain level of detachment, not indifference, but restraint. You become someone who feels deeply, but doesn't reveal everything. You respond, but you don't over-explain. You care, but you don't constantly reassure. That self-control, that emotional discipline, creates a kind of mystery that draws her in more than any grand romantic gesture ever could. You need to understand that mystery is not confusion. Confusion leaves her feeling unsafe. Mystery makes her intrigued. The difference is intention and consistency. When you're hard to read, you're still showing up with integrity. Your words align with your actions. You're just not giving her full access to your emotional roadmap. She doesn't know what every silence means. She can't predict every emotional response, and that slight uncertainty activates something within her. She pays closer attention. She becomes more attuned to your energy. She starts to look for signs in your tone, your timing, your energy shifts. That level of attention only comes when she feels there's something deeper to be discovered. Women are deeply intuitive. They pick up on patterns quickly. So if every time she says something, you respond the same way, or if every time you're upset, you retreat or overexpress, she starts mapping you out emotionally. She knows how to trigger you, how to pacify you, how to control the emotional tempo of the connection. But when you become a man who doesn't give away all his cards, when your emotional depth is felt but not fully seen, she can't control that rhythm as easily. That's when you become emotionally potent. You stop being the guy who reacts, and you become the guy who observes, who chooses when to engage deeply and when to let the silence speak. It's in your restraint that she starts to feel a kind of emotional pull. The moment she realizes she can't predict your every move, she starts becoming more invested. It's not about being aloof, it's about being sovereign. A man who is sovereign over his emotions doesn't fear being misunderstood because he knows his actions and intentions are rooted in self-respect. He doesn't need to overshare or defend his feelings. He allows her to experience him in layers, and each layer reveals more depth, not desperation. When you're hard to read, you're not just making her think, you're making her feel. Feel uncertain, feel curious, feel slightly off balance. That emotional imbalance is powerful because it creates a desire to regain equilibrium. And the only way she feels she can do that is by moving closer to you, by engaging more, by investing emotionally. That's where the shift happens. That's when the dynamic begins to tilt. Not in a way that disempowers her, but in a way that recenters you as a man who is not emotionally transparent to the point of predictability. You become someone she wants to understand, someone she wants to connect with on a deeper level, someone who pulls her in without saying too much, without doing too much, simply by being anchored in his own emotional gravity. So remember, the goal isn't to make her fear losing you through manipulation. The goal is to become the kind of man who naturally evokes curiosity, respect, and emotional concern simply by being intentional with your presence, your power, and your purpose. When a woman starts to worry about you in the right way, it means you've become more than a moment. You've become a mystery, and trust me, mystery makes memories. Be a man worth wondering about. Thank you.